Happiness in adulthood does not depend solely on financial well-being or physical health. It comes when a person learns to let go of the unnecessary, stops worrying about things that no longer matter, and finds harmony in life's simple joys. Often, we create unnecessary difficulties for ourselves by trying to please others, control what is beyond our power, or compare ourselves to those who are on a different path. With age comes the wisdom that the more we allow ourselves to be lazy in certain aspects of life, the more inner peace we feel. In this video, I will share 5 important things where it's worth allowing yourself a bit of laziness. These will help you enjoy every day, feel lightness in your soul, and face the future without fear or stress. Part 1. Laziness in pleasing others. Olga was always a person who strove to make everyone around her happy. From childhood, she heard from her parents that a good girl should be polite, obedient, and always put others' needs above her own. And she truly tried to live up to these expectations. In school, Olga never refused to help her classmates, even when she herself was struggling. She would share her homework with others, explain the material, sacrificing her own time. When she grew up and started working, the situation did not change. Colleagues quickly realized that Olga could be relied upon for any additional work, and she would not say no. She stayed in the office longer than anyone else, helped even those who did not want to put in the effort, and took on responsibilities that were not hers. In her personal life, she also prioritized others' desires over her own. She agreed to meetings even when she was exhausted after a hard day, traveled across the city to listen to a friend who complained about the same problems, even though Olga herself needed support. She tried to be the perfect daughter, the perfect friend, the perfect employee. But in doing so, she gradually lost herself. Over time, Olga began to feel not only physical, but also emotional fatigue. It seemed to her that she was living not her own life, but the life of others. She noticed that even in moments when she could rest, her thoughts were occupied with how to please others. She lost her inner balance and felt constant stress. Everything changed after one incident. Once, Olga fell seriously ill, but even then, she did not refuse to help others. Her friend asked for her help, and despite feeling unwell, Olga agreed. She set off on her way, but on the road, she felt that she simply could not move anymore. She felt bad right in the middle of the street. She sat on a bench and realized that she could no longer live this way. At that moment, she decided to change something. Olga began to gradually learn to say no. At first, it was very difficult. It seemed to her that if she said no, she would offend people or lose their trust. But over time, she realized that true friends and loved ones value her not for constant sacrifices, but for who she is. She learned to listen to her own desires. If she did not want to go to a meeting, she refused. If it was difficult for her to take on additional work, she clearly stated this. She stopped being afraid of being inconvenient. And interestingly, life became much easier. More time appeared for herself, for her favorite activities, for rest. She began to value moments of silence when she could be alone with her thoughts. She stopped feeling constant exhaustion. Her relationships with people also changed. She noticed that those who loved her only for convenience gradually distanced themselves. But those who truly valued her as a person remained by her side. Relationships became more harmonious, without the feeling of obligation to please others. This experience taught her an important lesson. We are not obligated to live in a way that makes everyone comfortable. We do not have to sacrifice ourselves for others' expectations. We can and should prioritize our own needs. So, if you feel that you are constantly trying to please everyone, try to allow yourself a bit of laziness in this regard. Learn to say no. If you don't want to do something, set your boundaries and don't let others cross them. After all, you have the right to live your own life, not one that is convenient for others. The sooner you stop pleasing everyone around you, the lighter and calmer your life will become. Part 2. Laziness in worries about the future. Petro was a person who always lived in worries. His thoughts constantly revolved around the future, and he could not relax and enjoy what he had. From a young age, he worried about what awaited him. In school, he feared he would not get into a good university. In university, he worried about whether he would find a good job. When he found a job, he worried about whether he would have a stable income, whether he would have enough money to live, whether he could support his family. The years passed, and his worries only changed form. When he got married, he began to worry about his children's future. He worried about whether they would study well, whether they would choose the right path in life, whether they would make mistakes that could harm their future. Petro often woke up at night with thoughts. What will happen in 10 years? Will I be healthy? Will I have enough money for retirement? Although it seemed that these questions were important and justified, the problem was different. His worries did not give him peace. He lived in constant tension, always planning, calculating risks, trying to prepare for all possible scenarios. He was so immersed in these worries that he did not notice how the best years of his life were passing by. One day, something happened that made him think. He was sitting in a park and watching children playing on a playground. They were laughing, running, enjoying every moment, not thinking about tomorrow. Petro remembered that he too was once carefree, light-hearted, and happy. But adult life made him a hostage to his own fears. Then he thought, how many years had he spent worrying about things that never came true? How much time had he wasted thinking about future problems instead of enjoying what he had now? Petro realized that constant worries did not allow him to live a full life. From that day, he began to work on himself. At first, it was difficult. Familiar thoughts kept popping into his head. What if something goes wrong? What if I can't provide for myself in the future? But he learned to let go of these thoughts. Petro began to notice the beauty of the moment. He started spending more time with his family, not being distracted by anxious thoughts. He began to pay attention to details that he had not noticed before. The singing of birds in the morning, the warm wind on his face, the smiles of his loved ones. One day, he decided to conduct an experiment. For a whole day, he forbade himself to think about the future and simply lived in the present. At first, it was not easy, but by the end of the day, he felt relief. He realized that today is much more important than fears about what has not yet happened. Over time, Petro learned to live in the moment. This did not mean that he completely stopped thinking about the future, but he no longer allowed these thoughts to control his life. He began to act and make decisions without unnecessary fear. He learned to trust life instead of constantly trying to control everything. Interestingly, his life became better. He stopped wasting energy on worries and instead began to use it for real actions. He no longer feared mistakes, did not try to calculate every step in advance. He realized that many things in life are simply unpredictable, and that's okay. If you also feel that your thoughts are constantly occupied with the future, try to allow yourself a bit of laziness in this regard. Learn to trust life, value today more, and don't let fears take away your happy moments. After all, real life happens here and now. Part 3. Laziness in accumulating unnecessary things. Grandpa Vasil believed all his life that any item could be useful in the future. He inherited this habit from his parents. who had survived difficult times and learned to keep everything that came their way. Vasil grew up in a family where nothing was thrown away. Old clothes, broken tools, empty cans, unnecessary newspapers. All these things were stored just in case, and over time, they accumulated more and more. When he grew up, this habit stayed with him. In his own home, he set aside a separate room for things that might come in handy. At first, there were only a few boxes, but over the years, they turned into a real warehouse. Old things accumulated faster than they were used. Broken tables that could be repaired, clothes that were still good but slightly worn, newspapers with interesting articles. All these things remained in his home. It seemed that these things gave him a sense of security, creating the illusion of preparedness for any situation. But in reality, they only cluttered the space and his thoughts. The more there were, the more he felt tired, without even realizing what was causing it. One day, his granddaughter Sophia came to visit him. She had always been surprised by the amount of old things in her grandfather's house. This time, she asked directly, "Grandpa, why do you need all this?" Vasil smiled at first, but then he thought. He really could not answer. All these things had been lying there for years, gathering dust, and were of no use. Sophia suggested going through the things together and getting rid of what was no longer needed. At first, Vasil resisted. It seemed to him that everything could still be useful. But then he agreed to try. They started with the simplest: old newspapers. Vasil flipped through the pages, trying to find something valuable, but it turned out that most of the information had long lost its relevance. The newspapers went into the trash, and the room immediately became more spacious. The next challenge was clothes. Vasil took out dozens of shirts and jackets from the wardrobe that he had not worn for many years. Some were old, others simply did not fit him anymore. Sophia suggested giving them to those who needed them. At first, he hesitated, but eventually he agreed. Then it was the turn of furniture and dishes. It turned out that half of the things in the house were just standing there unused. Broken tables that he had promised to fix but never did. Pots that no one used. Souvenirs that gathered dust. Each of these things carried memories with it. But were they really necessary? When the cleaning process was finished, Vasil did not recognize his own house. The space was filled with light and ease. Strangely, along with the unnecessary things, some invisible tension disappeared. He began to breathe easier, move easier, think easier. He realized that all these years, things did not allow him to truly enjoy life. They created the illusion of comfort, but in reality, they only took away energy. He felt true freedom, not from lack, but from excess. From that day on, Vasil no longer strove to accumulate. He became mindful of what was truly necessary and stopped storing things just in case. He realized the less clutter around, the more inner peace. If you also have things that take up space but are of no use, try getting rid of them. You will be surprised how much easier life becomes when the space around you is clean and free. Part 4. Laziness in comparing yourself to others. Marina had been comparing herself to others since her youth. In school, she constantly paid attention to who was doing better, who had nicer clothes, who had more friends. It seemed to her that happiness depended on how much she outperformed others. Over the years, this habit only intensified. In university, she evaluated herself through the lens of others' successes, who graduated faster, who had a more interesting job, who married a better husband. Even after she started her own family, the comparisons did not stop. She looked at her friends and thought, "Olena's husband earns more. Svetlana has a bigger apartment. Natasha's children are doing better in school. One day, Marina realized that most of her thoughts were not about her own life, but about what was happening in the lives of others. She could wake up in a good mood, but as soon as she saw a photo on social media of a friend who had gone on a trip, her mood would immediately sour. "Why can't I do that? Why am I not doing better?" she thought. Everything changed after a conversation with her older sister, Irina. Irina had always seemed calm and confident to her, although her life was not ideal. "Marinko, have you noticed that every time we talk, you talk not about your joys, but about others' successes?" Irina asked one day. This made Marina think. She really was more concerned with what was happening in the lives of others than with her own achievements. "But why, then," did her sister say, "do you know how I stopped comparing myself to others? I just imagined that everyone has their own unique path. We are all moving in different directions. If you look at neighbors, acquaintances, colleagues, and think that their life is better, you may never notice your own happiness." These words resonated with Marina. She realized that her habit of comparing was a real burden. It did not allow her to enjoy her own victories because there was always someone who seemed to be doing better. Marina decided to conduct an experiment. She forbade herself to compare her life with others for a week. If she noticed that she was starting to think about how someone looked better or achieved more, she immediately switched to her own successes. The results surprised her. She began to notice how much beauty there was in her life. She had a loving husband, 2 wonderful children, a cozy home, a job she enjoyed, her body was healthy, and this was much more important than wrinkles or extra weight. Most of all, she was struck by how much easier life became. She no longer felt the constant pressure to catch up with someone. She realized that happiness does not depend on comparisons, but on the ability to see the value in your own life. If you also feel that you are constantly comparing yourself to others, try to allow yourself a bit of laziness in this regard. Allow yourself to simply live, rejoice in what you have, and not measure your happiness by others' achievements. Then you will see that your life is beautiful, just as it is. Part 5. Laziness in trying to control everything. Katerina had always been a person who loved order. From a young age, she believed that the best way to avoid problems was to keep everything under control. She meticulously planned her day, checked that all tasks were completed, and ensured that nothing happened unexpectedly. When she became a mother, this need only intensified. Katerina wanted her children to grow up properly, well-behaved and responsible. She controlled their grades, their choice of friends, even what they ate. It seemed to her that if she did not interfere, the children might make mistakes. It seemed natural to want the best for your loved ones, but over the years, this control became burdensome for both her and her family. One day, her daughter Oksana said, "Mom, I know you want what's best, but it's hard for me when you constantly tell me what to do. Let me make my own decisions." Katerina was surprised. She had never thought that her care could be a burden to others. She just wanted to help. But her daughter's words made her think, did her constant control really bring benefits? The following days, she began to observe herself. She noticed how her hand reached to straighten something on the table, even though it was already clean. How she wanted to tell her husband how to properly fold things, even though he knew how. How she restrained herself from asking her son if he had really completed all his tasks. Then, she decided to conduct an experiment. She tried to let go of control, at least in small things. She did not tell her husband how to cook dinner. She did not check her daughter's homework. She did not correct her son when he improperly stacked the dishes in the cabinet. At first, it was difficult. She felt anxious. What if something goes wrong? But the days passed, and she saw that the world did not collapse without her constant control. On the contrary, there was more peace in the home. The children became more independent, her husband more relaxed, and Katerina herself finally felt that she could simply enjoy the moment, not worry about every little thing. Eventually, she realized, control does not provide real security. It only creates the illusion that everything is under control. In reality, life will always be unpredictable, and that's okay. By letting go of control, Katerina found true harmony. Her relationships with her loved ones became warmer because there was more space for them to be themselves. She became calmer because she no longer carried constant tension within her. If you also feel the need to control everything, try to allow yourself a bit of laziness in this regard. Let life take its course, and you will see that it becomes much easier and more joyful.